We got a new sign. Okay, all right. All right, that works. Okay. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm going to call to order the Monday, January 9th, 2023 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is oath of office. We have the Honorable Mayor Denyse McGriff, and she will administer the oath of office to Karla Laws and Paul Espe as our new planning commissioners. I'm not sure how this works, so.
Well, it's my first time too.
Okay, perfect.
Just have to get the official in. We have 2 mics. So who wants to go first? Karla, you want to go first? Sure. Come on down. And if it helps, we have the copy here.
Thank you.
All right, so repeat after me.
I,
Your name,
I, Karla Laws,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
and affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America
I will confirm and support the Constitution of the United States of America
and laws of the state of Oregon,
and the laws of the state of Oregon,
along with the Oregon City Municipal Charter and Code.
along with the Oregon City Municipal Charter and Code.
I will respect
I will respect
and support the Planning Commission bylaws,
and support the Planning Commission bylaws,
policies,
policies,
operations,
operations,
and decisions.
and decisions.
I recognize that a commission member,
I recognize a commission member,
has no legal authority as an individual,
has no legal authority as an individual,
and that decisions can only be made
and that decisions can only be made
by a majority vote
by a majority vote
at a public planning commission meeting.
at a public planning commission meeting.
I will faithfully and honorably
I will faithfully and honorably
perform the duties
perform the duties
of the office
of the office
for which I am about to assume.
for which the office I'm about to assume. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we need you to sign that
Okay.
right there. Oh. Can get pictures of you signing.
We have a
Oh, these, yes,
fancier one
fancier
for
one.
you to
Oh,
sign.
get the-
There you go.
yeah, sign the fancy one, because then you get this one to take home.
Oh, thank you.
We'll take it in, scan it.
Yeah, scan it, and then they will give it back to you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And hand it to your colleague.
Okay, go ahead. There you go, sir. Thanks,
Karla.
Thank you.
I don't think we had to do this last time we did this, did we?
No, this is the first time for me too.
Okay. Okay, so repeat it. I don't have to have them raise their right hand or anything, do I? Okay, well, we'll go with it.
Technically,
He's
I
saying
think-
no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Okay, so-
too much stuff.
I
I, Paul Espe,
do solemnly swear and affirm that I support
do solemnly swear and affirm that I support
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and laws of the state of Oregon,
and laws of the state of Oregon,
along with the Oregon City Municipal Charter and Code.
along with the Oregon City Municipal Charter and Code.
I will respect and support the Planning Commission bylaws,
I will respect and support the Planning Commission bylaws,
policies, operations, and decisions.
policies, operations, and decisions.
I recognize that a commission member
I recognize that a commission member
has no legal authority
has no legal authority
as an individual,
as an individual,
and that decisions can only be made by a majority vote
and that decisions can only be made by a majority vote
at a public planning commission meeting.
at a public planning commission meeting.
I will faithfully and honorably perform the duties of the office
I will faithfully and honorably perform the duties of the office
for which I'm about to assume.
for which I'm about to assume.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you want a picture of all 3 of us together?
That'd be great.
Okay, all right. I'll take your microphone.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I wanted to say a little bit. Oh, here's the one for you to sign. members volunteering. And for everybody that's already here, thank you for being here because, as you know, planning is near and dear to my heart. It's been my profession for a number of years. I had the privilege of serving for 8 years on the Planning Commission, 1 year as vice chair and 2 years as chair. So it's an important job, almost in many ways more important than the City Commission. I look forward to working with all of you as I have in the past, and I'm just very excited that you now have a full house again. And we will promise we will take good care of Mike Mitchell. We're sorry we stole him, but you know this is how it goes. And again, thank you all for being here and volunteering, and we will look forward to hopefully not too many appeals. So anyway, as you know, my door is open. Some of you already know how to get a hold of me. If you don't, she does, and she does, and she does. So feel free to call. I'm happy to talk to you about anything as long as we don't have any ex parte contact. So we're all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Get your folder, you get your document, because one of them's for you. You're supposed to get one of those.
They give it to us eventually. I guess they want to.
Okay. Okay. All right. So now that we've got the new members sworn in, can we do a roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Chris Staggs,
Present.
Commissioner Daphne West,
Here.
Commissioner Greg Stoll,
Here.
Commissioner Karla Laws,
Here.
Commissioner Paul Espe,
Here.
Commissioner Chair Dirk Schlagenhofer,
Present.
Commissioner Bob LaSalle. Not present.
Looks like Mr. Commissioner LaSalle is not here. Did you get Karla Laws? Her mic wasn't on.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it on? Okay. All right. Sometimes the guy behind the window
Sounds a lot
tells us.
louder.
Yeah. We sound fine, but then there's zero volume for anyone watching it. Okay. Next item on the agenda, election of officers. Does anybody introduce this, or do I just kind of briefly explain what we're doing?
There is no introduction. I can just say a couple of words that
Sure.
what's on the agenda comes from the bylaws, and so at the first commission meeting of every calendar year, there's an election of a chair and a vice chair. And so that goes through a nomination process amongst yourselves. You nominate somebody for chair and nominate someone for vice chair, and then you'll vote amongst yourselves. So.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess we'll just move straight into it. We need a nomination for chair. Let's start with chair. Do we have any nominations for a chair? Can be a new chair. Anyone?
I'd like to nominate Greg Stoll for chair. I think Dirk has done a great job for the past year or so. I have no questions or issues or problems with Dirk and what he's done. But I think it'd be great to have some diversity in the chair position. I think it's always good to have kind of circulate through to different people to do that. And I think Greg has demonstrated his ability to do that in a recent meeting where he filled in for you as the chair. And I think Greg has demonstrated a good ability to kind of listen to what's happening in the room and what's happening with the applications and make some, good choices in terms of how the conversation is organized. So I think he'd do a great job at it. So I'm going to nominate Greg Stoll for chair.
I agree 100% on all counts. Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Do we have any other nominations? Okay. Can we have a vote? Or do we need, do we have something from legal counsel? Okay, something else? Okay, wasn't sure. Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Commissioner Chris Staggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Daphne West,
Aye.
Commissioner Greg Stoll,
Aye.
Commissioner Karla Laws, sorry.
Aye.
Commissioner Paul Espy,
Aye.
Commissioner Chair Dirk Schlagenhofer.
Aye. Okay, so at this point, do we nominate a vice chair, or do we swap seats?
So since Commissioner Stoll has now been elected chair, the swap should happen, and then you elect the vice chair.
Thanks for your service, Dirk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Things are operating better here than they do in the U.S. Congress.
Not a high bar at the moment.
Like a
All right, I'd like to just thank everyone for your support and confidence, and I hope to do at least as good a job as Dirk has done. So I'll open up nominations for vice chair.
I would like to nominate Dirk for vice chair, Dirk Schlagenhofer. And I'll follow up on what Chris has just said. He's done a great job the last 2 years, guiding our group. And I think it would be the most stability and continuity for our planning commission to have him as vice chair for when the times that perhaps the chair can't be here. And so I nominate Dirk.
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All right. Call the vote, please.
Commissioner Dirk Schlagenhofer,
Aye.
Commissioner Chris Staggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Daphne West,
Aye.
Commissioner Karla Laws,
Aye.
Commissioner Paul Espy,
Aye.
Chair Commissioner Greg Stoll.
Aye. Sorry, new here. Motion passes, and Dirk, congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you need to swap seats again?
We can sort it out at the next meeting.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Give me a minute here to get my bearings. All right, so we'll open up public comment for items not on the agenda. Looks like I have one. Mr. Nacita?
How's that? Okay. James Nacita, Oregon City. I wasn't planning to do public comment, but listening to the mayor deliver the oaths, I feel compelled to express an opinion that I've kind of become a squeaky wheel about for the last 15 years. And that had to do with the part of the oath that she said that she had the two new members state that they recognize that they have no power as individuals. So I have always, as a city commissioner and since then, objected strongly to the idea that an individual city commissioner or an individual planning commissioner, whoever else in the city takes an oath of office, is not, has no power except as an individual. And couple of things. There are liabilities in state law if you violate your oath. So the state imposes some very serious duties on people who hold public office, whether it's elected or appointed. And so you need authority as an officer to responsibly implement the duties that you have and the public trust that you uphold when you enter an office like you folks have entered into. So I want to also read, and Mr. Beisman will be very familiar with this because it's something like I said, I've been talking about for 15 years. OCMC 2.08040, legal advisor. The attorney shall be the legal advisor of all city officers. It's a very problematic section of the code because it doesn't define what an officer is. So it leaves a lot to interpretive discretion. But I've always maintained, and I'll maintain tonight, that you have authority as individual office holders to procure advice from the city attorney at any time, and you don't have to get a majority vote as a commission to ask advice of the city attorney. That same goes for the city commission as well. Because you have so many liabilities and duties to uphold as individual planning commission officers, you have to have the power and the authority always as individual officers to seek advice as individual officers from the city commission. So I don't really believe that oath, that language wasn't in there when I took the oath in 2008, I don't think. So I probably would have objected to it if it was. I would like to know how it came about. It seems quite recent. But I always want you all to remember your authority. And you may recall that state law I gave folks last year about where your authority runs from, okay, i.e. the city commission, the elected representatives, and the state law makes this body an individual agency, just like the Urban Renewal Commission is. You are a creature of state law. And as officers of that independent planning commission, which, again, charges you with very specific duties, I hope you will, stand up for what is not only your right, but your responsibility to make those inquiries of the city attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment online, in the room?
No.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, but just before we go on, I think just a couple housekeeping things.
Sure.
You'll notice some green light bulbs next to your iPads. Those were installed recently so that if you have something to say or a question, you can turn it on, and it's supposed to make it easier for the chair, or in the city commission's case, the mayor, whoever's facilitating the meeting, to kind of look and catch their eye and say, oh, I see Dirk's light on, Commissioner Schlagenhofer's light on, does he have something to say? So that's the purpose of those green lights. Are they all working or? Okay. And then
Could you say that again? What are the green lights for?
It's to alert the chair that you have something to say. So you have a question, or that way, you've got an idea, you don't lose it, kind of a thing, or the chair doesn't move on without, pointing to you and saying, Commissioner Staggs, did you have a question, kind of.
Okay. Is there a way to turn up the volume, the general volume? Because I can barely hear you, and this thing isn't working, so.
We'll give it one, we'll try one, down there on the speakers maybe, just give it one increase. We had it turned up a little more earlier, and we got terrible feedback that we couldn't control. So that's why it's quiet. So we'll try to just project from our diaphragm. Okay. And then the other piece, I just wanted everyone to meet Kay Newman. I don't know if I properly introduced her at our last meeting. She's our administrative assistant, and she's been here since November already, and she's got our office running so much more smoothly and efficiently, and we're so grateful for her help. So you'll be seeing her at our future meeting. So, all right, thank you, Chair.
And welcome. So we'll move on to the first hearing of the night. It's legislative hearing, GLUA 22-0002, LEG 22-0001, House Bill 2001, Housing Choice Code Updates, Technical Revisions. I've got the script here to read. I know, I remember that it was on my email. Otherwise, I would have had Esther. Okay, public hearing on a legislative application is scheduled for tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Legislative actions involve the adoption or amendment of the city's land use regulations, comprehensive plan, maps, inventories, and other policy documents that affect the entire city or large portions of it. Legislative actions which affect land use shall begin with a public hearing before the Planning Commission. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. Upon a recommendation from the Planning Commission on a legislative action, the City Commission shall hold at least one public hearing on the proposal. Any interested person may provide written or oral testimony on the proposal at or prior to the hearing. At the conclusion of the hearing, the City Commission may adopt, modify, or reject the legislative proposal, or it may remand the matter to the Planning Commission for further consideration. If the decision is to adopt at least some form of the proposal and thereby amend the city's land use regulations, comprehensive plan, official zoning maps, or some component of any of these documents, the City Commission decision shall be enacted as an ordinance. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was received in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are others in the audience who would like to participate. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. If you would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please state your mailing address or email address. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing to continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the initial hearing is closed. And I believe for the legislative, I need to ask for conflicts of interest. Is that correct? No, not at all. All right, fair enough. All right, Ms. Robertson-Gardner, do you have this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair Stoll. So this evening, we have two portions of the Housing Choices Code update. The first, we separated into a separate package and presentation, and those are the technical revisions that were presented at the December 12th Planning Commission meeting. This is the official hearing for those technical revisions, and staff recommends this evening that the Planning Commission vote to recommend approval to the City Commission. So with that, staff would take just the technical amendments to the next available City Commission meeting. But the HB 2001 legislative file would be continued to the January meeting. So kind of pulling out this little piece of the process to move these technical revisions forward and allow us the time we need to finalize our policy conversation and overall, the end result of the policy conversation will be a draft memo that the Planning Commission will review and then present to the City Commission at a future work session. So this is the same presentation that I presented at the December meeting, that we have two new Planning Commission members. So I will do my best to provide an overview. Do please ask me any questions if you have them. There's going to be a lot of detail on the slide. I may not always read every piece of detail, but I'm available for any questions you may have. So with HB 2001 Code Amendment Package 2, we broke everything up into work session topics. What you see this evening are those two items. This in yellow is the formal vote, which is to recommend technical revisions to the City Commission. Just a little overview, House Bill 2001 was adopted by the legislature in 2019 as a way to provide additional housing choices in residential zones. There was a requirement of June 30th, 2022 to have code amendments adopted. That was done by the City Commission. And with that adoption, the City Commission realized there was some outstanding policy questions that needed to have some additional deliberation and consideration. And knowing that there very well would be some technical revisions needed, continued the legislative file to the October 23rd Planning Commission hearing, and since then the Planning Commission has met to discuss these outstanding topics and then those technical revisions you're seeing this evening. As I just amended, these are the first part was adopt the code to meet the requirements for compliance, and now we're kind of looking at those additional policy questions. So there'll be a couple of potential outcomes out of these discussions in Package 2 for this evening, and the technical revisions will be a recommended red line code to the City Commission. Our next agenda item would be a policy or work session request. But this evening, the technical revisions are actual red line code that would be sent to the City Commission for approval. So there are a couple of subtopics that come into these technical revisions. One I want to talk about is middle housing setbacks in commercial districts. I'll explain the topic in concept, and then like a lot of things, this topic had little threads that connect to different points to our municipal code. And so it's a pretty simple topic, but you'll see multiple chapters that are affected by it. So in Oregon City, our mixed-use corridor, mixed-use downtown zone, we have maximum setbacks of 5 feet. And so what that really means is when you have a commercial or multifamily project, you start at 5 feet setback from the property line at the street. And then as you move back, you provide additional pedestrian amenities. So the farther you move back from the street, your enhancement of pedestrian amenities increases. And that is to provide a better experience for both pedestrians and the commercial experience, to provide for commercial districts. Even if you have a residential project, you have kind of, I call it like you don't want missing teeth in your smile, right? So if you're walking down a commercial area, you want to have a cohesive streetscape. And so our Type 2, which is our administrative staff notice process, allows for that discussion of how far back you are from the property line and what your commensurate pedestrian amenities are. Well, this last summer, as we moved middle housing to what we call a Type 1 process, which was allowed both allowed in residential zones, but we've also allowed it in our mixed-use corridor zones, which would be like Malala Avenue or High Street or Warner Milne, and our mixed-use downtown zones. You have a 5-foot setback, but you don't have a way to go through the Type 2 process. You can't, through the Type 1 administrative review for the building permit, you can't have that give and take where you look qualitatively how much additional pedestrian amenities can you provide. So there's no relief to allow a larger setback in how we adopted the code today. Previously, before June 30th, middle housing went through the Type 2 process, so that same fourplex that would be permitted by right in a residential zone went through a notice Type 2 process. So staff recommended to have middle housing all go through the same process. With that Type 1 process now, there's no relief for the setback. So there are code options to address this. And I'd like to do the next section. Let's see, apologies, let me get to the right slide. First one is in the mixed-use corridor zone to allow standalone residential development of fewer than 5 units, so that would be middle housing. To be exempt from maximum setbacks and minimum density requirements of the underlying zone. And then mixed-use downtown, so that's our regional center downtown, still allow the units to be exempt from the maximum setbacks, but not necessarily the density requirements. Next slide. As part of our review of the issue related to middle housing and setbacks, we also identified that there needs to be an additional modification process added to our middle housing design standards. Right now, we don't have a modification process with criteria, and so we are recommending the introduction of new review criteria for a type 2 modification review. So if, let's say you wanted to build a fourplex, but your design was a little bit different. It met most but not all the design standards through, so you couldn't have it reviewed through a type 1 staff review. We would want to create a process where you could notice it through the neighbors and ask that an applicant could have a modification. And with that, we have to create review criteria. And the review criteria that's proposed is the same modification review criteria, which is in our site plan design review code. And that is, the modification will result in a development that better meets the applicable design criteria, and the modification meets the intent of the standard. On balance, the proposal will be consistent with the purpose of the standard for which the modification is requested. So that's the standard modification criteria. So we now have a process, and we have criteria which to approve it by. Let's see. The next section is townhomes and middle housing land division. I'm going to get to that section one second. So in our initial discussions with DLCD, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, they had indicated that townhomes, which is where you have a unit that is on a separate lot that is part of a building of more than 3 units, is required to go through the middle housing land division as an option. After further conversation with them post June 30th, it sounds like the city can provide code language that limits townhomes going through middle housing land division to be 4 units or fewer. And townhome developments that are 5 units or more are sent to our subdivision process. And why is that important is that townhome subdivisions of 20 or 30 or 40 lots are reviewed all the time in Oregon City. We have subdivision criteria in Chapter 16 that look at utilities, street connection, looks at our transportation system plan to look at if there are appropriate requirements for connecting to our other local streets. We have a process to look at larger subdivisions. The middle housing land division process was created to break up smaller middle housing projects, such as 3plexes and 4plexes. So a middle housing land division is really to cut up into child parcels a middle housing development that really went through the building permit process. And so we are recommending code amendments, a very simple one, that really delineates development into 2 categories. You have infill middle housing, so it would be 4 units or less on a lot. So that's, you go to the building department, you apply for your detached triplex or your 4plex, you build it, and then you have a middle housing land division that cuts the units into child parcels that can be sold. That is what middle housing land division is meant for. When you have a proposal that is more than 5 units, so you have a townhome proposal that might be 10 or 12 units, that really is more aligned with our subdivision chapter. So that is going through a subdivision chapter, which is a type 2 notice decision, but it has a lot more criteria that staff can look at. So we are recommending a very simple code change to the middle housing land division that really separates middle housing land division as infill oriented. And then items that are not infill oriented are really more a development application for a larger subdivision should go through the subdivision process. Finally, the last section of the technical revisions relate to driveways. As we went through the middle housing code update process this last spring, we realized we needed to have further conversations with our development services about their driveway policy, our driveway code, and how driveways relate to middle housing. And we knew that would take a couple of months. And so that kind of happened through the fall and winter. And there's recommended revisions to the driveway sections of Chapter 16 that address middle housing and also provide code to clarify existing policies. So I'm going to read them real quickly. One second. I think the largest piece of our conversation with Public Works was the conversation related to ensuring that driveways are located in a safe manner, but also providing an understanding that it's going to be very hard to require one driveway for a 4-unit project or for townhomes. And that would not necessarily be meeting the intent and spirit of middle housing land division. We have to provide an opportunity for middle housing to be built and to have safe access. So the recommended revisions to driveways involve requirements that paired driveways are required for every 2 units. So if you had a 4-plex townhome development infill, you could have 2 driveways. If you had a triplex, you could have up to 2 driveways. If you had a duplex, you had 1 driveway. And the other piece that was an existing policy, but the Public Works Department really felt was important, was related to minor arterials and collector, basically non-residential roads, such as Malala Avenue. If you are providing a middle housing infill, you have to provide a driveway configuration where you are not backing into traffic. And so they provided some additional clarity in the code language that says you need to provide an orientation of the driveway that requires you to have head-in or not to have back-out parking. So you have to show that you can get back into the street head first. So once again, there's a lot of kind of subsections with the driveway code. It's available in the packet. But really, it's trying to find that balance between safety, as well, pedestrians as well as cars, and honoring the goal of middle housing, which is to provide additional housing options in our residential zones and in commercial zones as well. So I'm available if you have any questions. Those are kind of some large overviews. The Planning Commission memo from December is available. We can go over subsections if you want. But really the big picture is option 1 of the technical revisions is to allow middle housing to have a larger setback in our commercial districts. 2, to allow driveways to be restricted to every 2 units on a development application, and 3, to have middle housing land division and townhomes be cut at 4 units. So anything above 4 units would go through the subdivision process. So driveways, middle housing land division, and setbacks. Let me know if you have any questions before we move forward for public comment.
Anyone have any questions? No, I only have one regarding the no back out parking. That is for arterials. A lot has to be arterial and in that MU mixed use corridor, or is it just based on the street classification?
That's a good question. Let me take a look at the code section. 1 second.
For instance, if this is developed in a residential zone that happens to have an arterial or a collector going through, does it apply to that development?
Let me verify. 1 second. Its driveways on collectors or arterials shall be provided in such a way that no backing of a vehicle will occur from the driveway to the collector or arterial, and that's regardless of zoning. So it'd be new driveways. So if you had a new, and that's something they do now as a policy when they do a safety analysis of a new driveway permit, and this really is just codifying existing policy.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on to public comment. I have one, Mr. Denyse again.
Thank you, Chair. James Denyse, Oregon City. Just had two quick comments. I had sent in some graphics, like to pop up there if that's possible. Okay, let's do the second one.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, the clock's still running, but I'll wait.
We'll make the allowance.
Yeah, we're multitasking over here, so.
So I made this map here last year during the city commission hearings on the equitable housing stuff, because I wanted to demonstrate to the commission to support what you all had done, and thanks again, because I was trying to get like ADUs and duplexes in the MUC zone, and you guys approved that, and the city commission approved that, so that's where that came from. But it's pertinent for tonight's discussion too, because one of the things I wanted to see if the Planning Commission might take an interest in, and staff, is for an equitable housing tool, would it be possible to create, mostly in the commercial zones like MUC and MUD or NC, but perhaps in other places, a lot size for tiny houses or small houses, which might be defined differently than tiny houses, say cottages. I have to thank Christina for educating me in this nice packet. I did not know that tiny houses were RVs, and that was very interesting to learn. So if you roll on a tiny house, could you also have like a tiny lot for that tiny house that could be carved out so that a young family might be able to benefit from home value appreciation and have both a small house on a small lot. In the MUC zone, here's the problem. In the MUC zone, you can't have single-family residences. So that kind of precludes someone who doesn't have a lot of money from buying a very small lot and rolling in an expensive tiny house onto that independent lot. And I think that's a thing for at least the MUD zone and maybe NC and historic, I can't remember. But if you did something like, if you adopted tiny houses as part of this process and also adopted a small lot size, in an area like MUC, what you could do, typically you go by minimum lot size. In something like the MUC, you could create a maximum lot size so that only in cases where you have a tiny house could you permit single family. You wouldn't permit regular houses to be built in MUC because those are typically on larger lots. And you run into density problems. But if you had a maximum lot size for tiny houses or cottages, then you certainly could keep the density requirements of the MUC zone, but you could also have young families benefit from the option of buying something that's truly affordable. You know, a small house or a tiny house rolled into a tiny lot, and you would still be able to maintain the density requirements. I drew that just to give a graphic of just how much extra housing we could do in a 3 or 4 block stretch around my house on High Street, which is in the MUZ zone. So there's 12, at least hypothetical places where you could have an ADU. So, but they would have to be on the same lot as the parent house, on the parent lot. But if you could carve out for each of those, black rectangles, a small lot to put something like that on, then as the value of the neighborhood increases, then the young family would benefit from that appreciation of value rather than only having the ADU available for a rental, where it's not the young family, but it would be the more wealthy homeowner who benefits from the rise in the appreciation of value because of the rental income stream that property is getting as well. So that was one point. The other point I wanted to make was, and this kind of goes to the future we're going to have to confront with the climate-friendly communities thing that's coming down the pipe from the state. I'm wondering if it would be an idea to create a code provision that exempts even triplexes from parking requirements if they are within a certain distance from a high-capacity transit stop. Like the 33, okay, comes up High Street, goes up Lynn, and goes all the way up to, I think, the college. If you want people to, not own cars, you could permit developers to build up to a triplex and use the space for living and not for a parking lot, because they can, walk 500 feet to a bus stop or quarter of a mile. I'm sure there's data out there somewhere on, how close you have to live to a bus stop to have the bus stop used regularly. And the mixed-use corridor was developed by Metro specifically. The corridor part of the definition was for a transit corridor, to have a bus or a light rail, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, it would work in other neighborhoods, even not commercial. I mean, if the 33, like going up Lynn Avenue, that's going through a single family area. But with the, SB 2001 or whatever, the equitable housing, you have to allow duplexes and triplexes even in that single-family residential zone. So right now, they would be required to have a certain amount of parking if it's a triplex in that residential zone along Lynn, which has high-capacity transit. Why not exempt even triplexes along that 33 bus route, even if it's not in, say, MUC or MUD, but in that stretch of high-capacity transit? So thank you. Thank you very much for your interest and patience.
Thank you. I guess it's not really a rebuttal, but anything else that you'd like to add?
No, most of Mr. Nacita's comments, I think, are really related to the next portion.
Yeah.
Just to remind everybody that detached duplexes are allowed in the mixed-use downtown and mixed-use corridor zone today, and could go through the middle housing land division process.
All right, well, as we have a discussion, or if there's a motion to forward this along, can you bring up the slide of whatever that motion would be?
Most likely would just be recommend approval of the legislative 2201 Housing Choices Code update technical revisions to the City Commission.
Okay, and just a procedural question. It looks like both of the hearings tonight are on the same file, so do we need to continue twice or just once at the end?
Either option's available
Either
to you,
option.
whatever makes most sense.
Okay. All right, Vice Chair Schlagenhofer.
Yeah, I'll make a motion. Are we making a motion exactly the way it's drafted in the staff report, or do we make any changes? We didn't change anything, did we? We're going, okay. So I'll make a motion to approve, recommend approval and forward to the proposed technical revisions to the City Commission for review at the next available City Commission meeting and continue GLUA 22-0002, LEG 22-0001 to the January 23rd, 2023 Planning Commission hearing.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All right, call the vote, please.
Commissioner Vice
Chair.
Vice Chair Dirk Schlagenhofer.
Aye.
Commissioner Chris Staggs.
Aye.
Commissioner Daphne West.
Aye.
Commissioner Chair Greg Stoll.
Aye.
Commissioner Karla Laws.
Aye.
Commissioner Paul Espe.
Aye. All right, motion passes. I'll move on to package 2. Again, it's the same file, so do I need to read the legislative? No, okay, we're good. All right. Ms. Robertson Gardner again.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll bring this up. And I apologize for my scratchy throat this evening. Okay. Thank you, Chair Stoll. As identified at my previous presentation, we're at the work session topic, which is to look at affordability incentives that are land use related, RVs, recreational vehicles, and tiny homes. So really what staff is asking this evening is for general Planning Commission direction. This meeting is not intended to encapsulate every issue and idea related to making housing more affordable in Oregon City. These are very complicated and often very interrelated policy questions, but you got to start somewhere. So that's what we're doing tonight. And these policy questions touch more than one city department and often involve city fiscal policy discussions. And so with this, really what staff is looking for in your discussions this evening, are any of these policy issues something that you as Planning Commission would like to recommend to the City Commission as a future work plan item? So they can plan out staff time and FTE and understand what departments are needed and what public outreach is needed. And two, are there pieces of these policies, questions that really resonate with you? And based on the conversation this evening, I will take notes and incorporate them into our final draft memo that you'll be reviewing that kind of reviews all of the policy discussions to date and can set the Planning Commission up when they meet with the City Commission at a future work session. So there's kind of the first big picture question of these main topics, do you wish as a Planning Commission to recommend to the City Commission to pursue them? And if you do, are there areas that really resonate with you? And I'll incorporate that into the memo that the Planning Commission sends. Okay, if there are any other topics not included in this list that you think merit a conversation with the City Commission, let me know and I can add that into the draft memo. So I'm going to start with the first policy, and that's the land use affordability incentives. And actually, before I do that, the memo I sent to you really laid out the 3 topics, and in the back of the memo, I tried to provide as much background as possible with work the state's doing regarding housing choices, housing affordability, and housing production, what's in our newly adopted Oregon City Comprehensive Plan, and what is in our code already as it relates to some of these topics. So in your conversation, we can go back to the kind of the reference area to the back of the memo if you have specific questions. And additionally, if you want to continue any topics to a future meeting because you want additional information, that can be part of the discussion this evening as well. So the first item is land use affordability incentives, and that was identified by Elizabeth Decker, who is our consultant with JET Planning, and then also forwarded from the Planning Commission to really talk about this winter during Package 2. And the question is, should the city request a future work plan to look at adopting code that provides development incentives for projects that meet thresholds for affordable housing beyond what already exists in the code? If yes, are there options that you are particularly interested in pursuing? And 2, do you need any additional information on specific topics? So more flexible code provisions for middle housing could be selectively targeted at projects meeting affordability requirements. Often that is 80% of median family income, though some projects go all the way up to 120% of median family income. Several options considered during the policy development process could be allowing additional units, such as permitting sixplexes on the same size lots as quadplexes. Could be additional lot coverage allowances, increased townhome density than what is currently allowed in the differing zones today, and reduced parking requirements is one option, though as we're learning more about the parking amendments that were just adopted by the city as of January 1st or implemented, which looks at a half mile from frequent transit service. That's a fair amount of the city right now, as of January 1 for new projects, will not require any minimum parking, and I can bring up that map if you want to have further conversations. But there are potentially some projects outside of that half mile that if they are affordable, could benefit from parking reductions. The city could also consider the ratio of market rate and affordable units required to be eligible for any incentives. In contrast to larger multifamily affording housing projects, affordable middle housing projects will be smaller scale and may be more likely to be built by smaller market rate builders or mission-driven nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity. Potential thresholds could include all units capped at rates affordable to households earning 80% or 100% or 120 of the median family income, or have 50% of the units capped at rates affordable to households earning 60% or less of median income. Discussions with affordable and market rate developers would be critical to understanding interests in building affordable or mixed income middle housing projects, and better understand which regulatory incentives would be most supportive in order for those developments to occur. And kind of some of the big the elephant in the room, I think, which is not necessarily part of land use, but is absolutely integrated to developing housing in Oregon City, is discussions related to system development fees. And those are fees assigned to all new residential development that look at providing fees for our future capital improvement program based on growth. And those would be parks, water, sewer, transportation, utilities. So those are identified by our city commission, and let's see, if that's something the planning commission wishes to see the city commission review at a future work plan, it can be folded into the final planning commission recommendation memo to the city commission. As part of a housing production strategy, which is something that all cities will be looking at this next decade, in Oregon City we're later on the list of required implementation. I believe we're 2027, which means we would probably start that work in earnest in 2024 and 2025. There are many ways to look at system development fees, of looking at ranking them or categorize them by size or location. There's ways to look at system development fees and further categorize them based on size and location. Let's see. In Oregon City today, we do have one affordable housing density bonus, and that's in our high-density residential section, and I did have a link to that in the memo. And it does allow for a bonus when you have a residential project in our multifamily zone that has affordable housing component. You can have up to 20% increased density today. So that has yet to be pursued by anybody, but that is the one section in our code where we do have an affordable housing land use component. That's an incentive. But we don't have that for any of the low-density and medium-density residential zones as it relates to middle housing. That would not be an option currently. All right. The next, go ahead.
Before we move on, do we want to have discussions on individual topics or wait till the end to have them? What's the preference?
Whatever's your pleasure.
It's up to you guys, if you have any input.
I was just curious if you guys had demolition fees or demolition taxes, incentives for deconstructing or doing any of that.
Not at this time, but that could be brought in as an option. So almost a disincentive, I guess, affordable housing disincentive. You're thinking of putting a deconstruction or demolition
That can
tax
tie
on.
into sustainability and climate-friendly communities as well. And deconstruction is kind of a good thing. It's happening in Portland to some degree. But if there isn't any kind of incentive to do it, then no one will. And I suspect that there will be a lot of demolition in the future with the increased incentive for doing smaller housing or middle housing.
Commissioner Lawson?
Have we compared to other areas in terms of tiny neighborhoods and then also like villages possibly? Like are there areas that we've compared to, or is this still a process for the commission? Or like I've been told there's a tiny village in Bend,
Hold on a second.
tiny village in Vancouver.
So I think right now we're on land use affordability incentives. Do you want me to go through the next two or three
so
slides?
that's gone, that's fine.
That might be a next slide.
And then the only other incentive I would think is to promote a tree canopy possibly is if we're looking at another unit on a piece of land, is there any incentives looking at possibly considering to the commission about looking at, promoting a tree planting or tree canopy?
Like it would relate to like a setback reduction or density allowances if you stayed, like the tree's in the wrong place to where you want to put the home and how to allow it, yeah. No, that could be, that's the goal, is are there other things that resonate with the Planning Commission? And can I forward those comments on to the City Commission?
Vice Chair Schlagenhofer?
I do have a question. Are the next two slides about affordability, or are we going to move into something else?
No, we're going to move into the next.
Okay.
I have a slide on land use affordability, RVs,
Okay.
and shelter homes.
All right, then I have some thoughts on this. I like the affordability incentives, but what I'm seeing is it seems like the incentives save the developers money, but I'm not seeing any guarantees that he's going to pass that on, or does he need to pass that on to the buyers? And then if for some reason they do feel good about, saving people money and they pass it on to the buyers, how can we ensure that these actually go to people that need the housing? Are we going to require they're sold to first-time buyers? Is there some kind of they need to stay in them for 5 years before they can resell them? Otherwise, we're going to be making some low-cost housing. Investors may put in top dollar and make them all rentals.
Yeah, those are all great questions, and different programs have different requirements. Habitat for Humanity has a specific income requirement, and then actually not being able to add on, like land trusts is another option, and you can add on, and there's some projects that have a timeout. So there's lots of options depending on what the city wants to pursue about rules related to incentives for qualified affordable housing projects.
Okay, yeah, I think it's important that we keep those thoughts, at least in my opinion, important parts of the process, that those aren't lost in there somewhere, and then the people that actually need affordable housing aren't first in line. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
And I just had kind of a similar question. What would be the enforcement mechanism of that affordability? Like how would we ensure that if it's a rental and the limit is 120% or affordable for 120% of median income, how do we enforce that? How do we make sure that actually happens?
I don't have the specific section, but programs require covenants, they require report backs, different programs who have different thresholds.
Okay.
I might.
That's good news.
I would just say that that has been a struggle for communities throughout the country as to how to make sure that happens as, those get built. And there's a variety of different ways, from tax abatements that you can later recapture to enforcement actions to other things. But that is a critical part of the program if, in fact, you actually want that to remain affordable, those homes to remain affordable.
Absolutely.
And I think what we're looking for tonight, if we were to move this on into a work program, all of these questions that you're raising right now are things that we would go back and research and look for how other cities have done it and bring back examples, so.
Commissioner West?
I'm really struggling with hearing staff tonight. I can hear everyone up here, but I'm struggling. I don't know if
Can't hear me?
Yeah, if you don't have your mic right in front of you, or, Aquila, it's been easier to hear when you speak right into your mic. I don't know, maybe I need a headset.
How about this? Is this better? I'm almost eating.
Oh, sorry, you're not feeling well, or you've had some
But
voice
is this
issues.
better?
Yeah.
Okay, I will try really hard to speak very close to the mic, so let me know if I drift away.
All right, carry on.
Okay. All right. The next topic is tiny homes and RV occupancy options. 1 second, let me take my... So we kind of have currently, units are kind of broken up to what I call kind of 3 categories, and I described that in the memo. And these are a little amorphous and they float a little bit, but it's an organizing principle. You have stick-built homes, and those would be kind of like tiny stick-built homes that are approximately 180 square foot to 400 square foot. They could be separate dwellings with full cooking facilities or be accessory buildings to the main house that require connection to public utilities. And they do trigger SDCs. So someone could build a very small 400 square foot, like studio detached apartment in their backyard today, but they're paying the system development fee for 1 unit of a multifamily so right now, system development fees come in, we have 2 categories. We have a full single-family home, which I wrote this down. As of January, it's $48,416. Or we have the other category, which is a unit in a multifamily, an ADU, or a unit of middle housing. So any of the, it's the other category, so the not single-family residential, and that currently is $25,704. And so right now, if you have a tiny stick-built home, you can build it, we'll permit it, but if you want to have as a separate dwelling unit that's rented out, you are paying that second fee, which is the $25,000 fee, and we're considering you basically would be a detached duplex or accessory dwelling unit, depending on what process you went through. The second category we call park models or tiny homes on wheels. And Commissioner West was asking about what a park model is. Does this commission know what a park model is? It is an interesting hybrid. It's kind of like a manufactured home on a chassis. And actually, I sent Kay an email with a picture of a park home. And I don't know if you're able to open your email. No, okay.
Do you want to send it to me, and I'll try to get it onto that computer?
Oh, okay. I will try to. Well, we're having a conversation. I think Commissioner West asked, and I thought if she needed more information, the rest of the commissioners might be helpful to get it. So 1 second. Let me do that. Okay. And the reason why park models are in this separate category, the manufactured home, is they kind of have 1 foot in the recreational vehicle code and 1 foot in the manufactured housing code. And so they're regulated a little bit differently, but they're generally about 400 square foot. And so when I go, so those tiny homes on wheels, which you kind of see now in the last 15 years, someone might put something on a chassis, and it might kind of be a camper on a chassis. Those are generally under 400 square foot. And right now, we do not allow those as dwelling units. So if you're on a chassis, we would not allow you to stay overnight in them. So be it a traditional RV or a tiny home on wheels, you would have to take it off the chassis, and you would have to hook up to city water and sewer and pay the system development fee. So you'd have to kind of evolve it into a regulated dwelling unit that hooks up to utilities. A park model can easily be taken off its chassis and turn in, and we do that in manufactured home parks today, kind of turn it into a dwelling unit. And then finally, recreational vehicles is the third category, and those are registered with the DMV, and those are vehicles. And those in our city code are not allowed for overnight use unless you are in an allowed RV park, and we have one, and that is our municipal RV park in Clackamas Park. And I made everything more complicated with my 1 photo of a park model, so I apologize. It's okay. Yeah. We can do a Google search real quickly. There we go. Look at that. So that's a park model for people who don't know what park models are. They look like a manufactured home. They generally are smaller, about 400 square foot, and they often have that kind of front little porch. So that's what park model means. You've probably seen it before and just thought it was a manufactured home. So, thank you for all your technical assistance. Okay. Back to presentation. Sorry. That was a test. You passed. Okay. I'll go. I'll find. Oop. My gosh, okay. Thank you very much. So with those 3 types, I think the crux of the issue is if you are not able to hook up to city sewer and water and pay your system development fee, you are not allowed to consider it a dwelling unit. And so what this whole topic of this slide is are there situations should the city create a future work plan to look at adopting code that allows tiny homes or recreational vehicles or other mobile dwelling for overnight use in certain circumstances in the city? And if yes, are there options that you're particularly interested in pursuing? So is there a situation where, an option that you think the city should pursue? In our packet, you can kind of see what other jurisdictions have done. City of Portland actually did allow the use of RVs overnight. That being said, there are a lot of issues related to safety and the dumping of your sewer waste and how to do that in a way that is not a blight on the city. And so there's a lot of technical issues related to kind of leaving the world of hooking up to sewer, hooking up to water, paying system development fees. And so, I'm going to switch. And so this would definitely, as a work plan, we would need to reach out to other jurisdictions, most importantly our Public Works Department and the City Commission to better understand when this would be a benefit to our community as providing other housing options for people who may not have options that are readily available to them. But in what circumstances would the city commission, want to pursue? That's the second topic. Any questions before we move on to the third topic?
I just want to clarify current code. If I have family come over to visit and I have them sleep in my travel trailer in the driveway, that's against code.
Correct.
I get sick and I want to isolate myself from my family and I stay in my travel trailer, that's against code.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's not allowed for overnight use.
If I get tired and want to take a nap in the middle of the afternoon in my travel
You are
trailer.
fine.
Okay. Until the sun goes down.
Yeah, I mean, that's the harder part, right? So code enforcement, you move forward when people are actively not meeting the intent of the code, which is you're living in an RV on the property.
Right. Okay, Commissioner Laws?
My question is how do you even enforce code? Because, I've seen occupancy like in Oregon City, and, some I didn't have a problem with, but they kept the place clean, they had little hippie lights, like camping, but the thing is I know I talked to code before about scenarios, because I live in the historic areas, and for them to actually go there to enforce code, they really can't do it. So it's kind of like a catch-22. How do you even enforce code?
Sure. I think code enforcement is a separate conversation. Once again, that's back to the city commission of staff allocation and priorities of work plan. But I always look at from planning, if a permit is required, then we have a little bit more control over things. So you can, if this was something that was moved forward to a work session, there probably would be some type of permit. You're allowed to do this if you follow the following and you get a permit. And so that way you can review and enforce.
Any other questions? Vice Chair Schlagenhofer?
Okay, we're discussing some of these topics right now. Are we going to be discussing before we make a motion to decide what we're going to ask to push through, or?
Yeah, we still have public comment as well to get through before we.
Okay, so I'm going to wait until the end of the presentation and then we'll discuss what we're going to recommend. Okay.
Into the presentation, ask questions, public hearing or public comment, then discuss, as I understood it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty heady topic, so I don't have all the answers for you, but I think really trying to understand what parts of this resonate with you and a little more detail as we get into, and what doesn't resonate with you, also the opposite is helpful, writing up my memo. Okay. The following section I actually broke out to be a third topic. It was originally part of the tiny home, but it was just different enough that it really warranted its own conversation topic, and that's micro shelters. And so how micro shelters are different than kind of these other smaller residential units is they are so far in Oregon, they've been done by the city of Salem and the city of Corvallis, are two examples. They're in other cities, but I provided links to the city of Salem and city of Corvallis' project pages. And generally, they're small structures that can be placed on a non-residential property to provide temporary shelter on a short-term basis. They are currently not permitted outright in Oregon City, but could potentially be part of a House Bill 2006 shelter application, if that came in, which isn't allowed to have a shelter application in. Even if a building permit is not required because the shelter is smaller than 200 square feet, our building department would be involved in some type of safety review because it would be a sleeping unit. So we would involve our building official would be reviewing them and making sure that they've met fire life safety issues, not necessarily the threshold for the building construction. So the city of Salem has a micro shelter process that allows temporary housing opportunities for people who are unsheltered. This is really an option to partner with nonprofits to offer temporary shelters, and you can provide up to 40 small living spaces to be used as part of their permitting process. And then the city of Corvallis, I don't know necessarily, I could not find their maximum, but at the same time, they identify that micro-shelter approvals are not provided as a permanent land use right and can be revoked at any time. So it's really a shelter service kind of program, and they made sure not to make it necessarily linked as a kind of a permitted land use right that runs with the land. So those are kind of what other cities have done, but it's really looking at providing sheltered housing for mainly our unhoused community in Oregon City. And are there places that would make sense to allow this? And is this something that the City Commission would want to move forward for a future work plan item? There's a lot, as you know, this is a very complicated issue, but these discussions always start somewhere. So some of these discussions can start this evening. And those are majority of my slides for this. As I identified, I have some relevant housing policies and plans in the memo, specifically our 2021 to 2023 commission goals. You'll notice it's 2023. Our city commission will be looking at providing new commission goals this spring. I think they're doing a retreat sometime in the next couple of months, so out of that process will come their new goals, but these are their existing goals that we have attached in the memo, as well as our new comprehensive plan. Statewide, the state of Oregon just released their Oregon housing needs analysis. They understood that they were requiring all these cities statewide to do a housing needs analysis and really an understanding of a production analysis of how could the state help support the production of new housing units. So they just released the report I think in November, and there's a link on the memo that has their overarching report where they kind of have the state of housing need statewide, and then also what the state government can do to move to the next steps for housing production. Oregon City, as I mentioned, we did our housing needs analysis, adopted it in December of 2021. With that, we have a requirement as a city to do what we call a housing production strategy, which looks at all the tools in the toolbox, not just land use, and how the city is looking at reducing barriers for building housing, and also not just reducing barriers, but incentivizing and encouraging the housing production. And that will be required for adoption in 2027 for Oregon City. That being said, the City Commission can move forward on individual strategy tools if they want to move forward before the requirement of the report. Most likely we'll get a grant and we'll hire a consultant team to help us. Luckily, being last in line is we get to see what all the other cities have done, what's working for them and what isn't working. So we have a real opportunity to kind of watch what's happening region-wide in the next couple of years. And then Senate Bill 8, which you may not know of, but was adopted recently, really provides an opportunity for nonprofits and city-owned properties to allow multifamily to be built as a permitted use, even if the zone doesn't currently allow that, and that is statewide. And so I have a link to that as well. And I'm available for any questions this Planning Commission may have, and I'll be taking notes in your discussions.
All right, any questions?
I have one. I know that you guys just got done with your comprehensive plan, and I know that, and maybe this is too far-flung to talk about tonight, but, you know, all this middle housing stuff really turns all of the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan on its head. And it's just kind of weird to be doing all of this long-range planning at the level of SB 2001 as opposed to doing the comp planning first. But that's neither here nor there. We don't have any control over that, I understand. But hopefully we can look at things that are comprehensive plan related that speak to the impacts of middle housing providing parks, providing open space, providing adequate streets, transportation, somehow getting TriMet to catch up with all of the ideas that we have with SB 2001 so that it can accommodate, moving the people, the additional density that we're planning for. But I probably digress. I don't want to go any further, but I just hope that we're thinking about those things too.
Do you want to make any comment related to kind of the thought process related to middle housing and our OC 2040, kind of how that was thought through?
I don't recall us having specific goals, policies, or strategies directed at middle housing, but certainly, more comprehensive look at providing adequate infrastructure, utilities, transportation. One of the chapters is a protected environment, and so there's discussions in there about park space and protecting our natural resources. And so I think the concepts that you're thinking about are addressed in the comprehensive plan. And so how we move through with middle housing and then continuing to address the comprehensive plan will be a balance.
It kind of goes from general to specific because, you look at the goals and policies, in providing, enough property and space for the development that we're anticipating. And then we're also looking at, mitigation strategies for the actual development that occurs.
Right.
Commissioner Laws?
A few things that come to my mind as I live in the historic part myself. My neighbor and I have a driveway along each other, so kind of the concept of what you're looking at in a sense with the driveway situation to a degree. The one thing I can't imagine is if I were going to do an ADU, either it would be my garage next door to my neighbor's garage or park it in my driveway, which is a really long, adequate driveway, but it'd be right next to my neighbor. Is there going to be a process, depending on how close it is to the neighbor, where a neighbor could be a part of the process possibly to give input?
So are you kind of thinking about if someone were to place a tiny home on their property, where the location on their property where it gets placed, and if there's input in that regard? Is that the question you're asking?
Especially if it's abutting right along my neighbor's property. And then, that's something I think is important. I mean, I would, as a neighbor, talk to my neighbors, but there's some people who wouldn't, and, how that would work. That's obviously a complicated situation. There's a lot of legality to it. I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but it's something to consider.
Sure, yeah, I wanted to make sure I understood your question. And so I believe if I'm kind of picturing what you're saying and understanding what you're saying, if you were to place that tiny home on your driveway and then it impacts your neighbor, does your neighbor have a say in that? And yes and no. So yes, in that if this is something that you move forward on and we implement, regulations around tiny homes, we can implement regulations about where they're located on your lot and what kind of setbacks they have. And so that's where the public gets to make their input. But then it becomes a clear and objective process where it's really could become an over-the-counter type thing. So I'm going to look across the room, make sure I'm saying this correctly, because I think once we get past the stage of setting the regulations, that there really isn't that opportunity for your neighbor to comment in a setting like this.
Yeah, when we're dealing with residential development, there's clear and objective standards, and the ability to talk to your neighbors is a skill that we all should have, but the reality is that for a variety of different reasons, it may not happen. And the way our code is set up and the way state law requires our code to be set up is if you're doing something as simple as putting a residential home, as long as you meet the setbacks and other requirements, you don't have to talk to your neighbor.
Any other questions? Vice Chair Schlagenhofer. Yeah, just put the lights where I can see them. That one's hiding behind the iPad.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple things I wanted to discuss, and then I wanted to get the other commissioners' opinions on them. And then if anybody feels that there's something here, maybe we'll recommend, considering it as a future work session item.
So right now is questions for the staff. We need to get public comment before we deliberate.
It may turn into a question
Okay.
for staff.
Okay.
So I'm not sure which order to do this in. But the staff is still here, so, and it'll be here later. Okay. All right, so the first thing, it's about the RVs, and it has to do with, I'm sorry, I gotta find it. Exhibit 9C, is there any way to bring that up? And I'm not gonna be really long-winded about it. I think page 9 tells a pretty good story. We're talking about affordable housing. ADU, because of the SDCs, building permits, the fact that it needs to be built like a home, 150 to 500,000. Those aren't super affordable numbers. Tiny home on wheels gets better, but it's still 45 to 82,000. You can almost move into a mobile home park for that. Well, besides the lot fees. And then the RV, I mean, we can start at 25,000 and go to 52. That's by far the most affordable option. It all sounds great until you go down to the Wood Village study, the Wood Village case study. I didn't read it word for word, but the consensus I saw from the people from the public that came and discussed their views, they're not all fans. Not everybody's a fan of someone moving an RV next to their house, and then hopefully the person, plumbs the septic properly. So, in my opinion, I love RVs. I think the cost is a extremely affordable transition from possibly living in a car to living in a home, but I think they belong in an RV park. And so that's my view on that, and that's about as far as I'm going to go on that one. The next one is the micro shelter villages. I have more questions than I got answers on it. It's considered transitional housing, so my question is, do the people that would stay in those, would they have to pay anything? If they don't pay for it, would it be a city program? Would it be a nonprofit that runs these things? Would there be any accountability on the behalf of the people that stay in them, or would anybody be able to just go and crash because they've got nowhere else to go? I think transitional would require social services, especially if they're not paying to stay. So I think there's a lot of questions there. Do people pay anything? Do they need to do anything to stay in there, or is there no accountability? And I think if we recommend that as a work session item, I think we need to ask a lot of those questions. And that is all I have for now. Thank you.
If you like, I can give a little bit of input on the microshelter question. So I think the idea behind that is not that it would become a city program, but that if the regulations were created to allow it somewhere, and we identified the proper zone that, the Planning Commission and City Commission think that a microshelter could go, we would create the regulations. It would be in the zoning code. We would say, zone X, one of the allowed uses, or, I guess it could be an allowed use, or through this shelter siting application allows a microshelter village. And that's kind of the extent of what we would do from the planning side. And what that does is allow for a nonprofit or other community group to come in and say, there's a place where I can have this type of service. It's a very different question to ask for city partnership or city sponsorship, and I'm not sure that that even is in the community development department's purview. So essentially, like, presenting this to you is just, is this something where you want to consider or look at the alternatives for providing the option? And that's kind of the extent of what we're talking about at this time. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, and one of the reasons I bring it up is because we do have the Father's Heart here in town, and they mean well, they do good work, but there's been some problems that have occurred in the neighborhood, and I worry that we need to be careful what we approve or what we allow, because a village of transitional housing without, it being well-run can create a problem for a neighborhood, and they don't always end up in the right place because sometimes the land's not available. A nonprofit finds a building that's vacant, it ends up in the neighborhood, but it happens to be right next to the neighborhood. So, yeah, not sure what to do with that, but that popped out of my head. Thank you.
Commissioner Laws?
One thing to consider as well is there's also organizations coming in and doing transitional homes as it is security and safety. Not that the city needs to be responsible for all that, but like Dirk was saying about social services or some type of training or counseling. If the state intervened in something like that, for instance, they would offer services of some sort. And so I think we need to be very cautious on what we do to our neighborhoods as well, to actually offer some type of services to improve yourself. Like, there's some places that claim to be Oxford Living. They actually should be Oxford Living and certified. So if we're looking at those, we want success for our city and we want to improve livability. So when we do these things, is to do them conscientiously and create people to be able to come out of it and support themselves.
Okay, any other questions? I have a couple of them. For transitional housing, the micro shelters, it all says temporary. What is, and I couldn't find this in either of the FAQs for Salem or Corvallis, what's the definition of temporary? What's the time limit in general of they can stay for, and Mr. Edgar may be able to answer this when he comes up for his testimony. Not just yet, but we're getting there. Is there within the city of Salem or Corvallis or Portland, is there some sort of a time limit?
I'm not aware of an industry standard. While Mr. Egger is speaking, I'll do a little research, see what I can find.
Okay. And a couple meetings ago, you alluded to some different standards for churches and religious organizations regarding this sort of housing.
For Senate Bill 8?
I'm sorry?
Senate Bill 8?
Is that what it is? You just said that there was, I remember you saying they had different standards.
Let me look, 1 second. Grabbing my code section, 1 second. I was hoping for a link. There's a... Okay, so Senate Bill 8 requires local governments to allow the development of certain affordable housing on lands not zoned for residential uses. And so if the property is owned by a public body or a nonprofit corporation, and the property is zoned for commercial, and the property is zoned to allow religious assembly, the those lands can be redeveloped for affordable multifamily housing, and they would go through our site plan and design review process for multifamily, even if the zoning code did not say permitted use multifamily. And that Senate bill was adopted, I believe, last year.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Staggs?
The specific question I have for staff is, today, if I'm a landowner in Oregon City, and say I have, I don't know, half an acre of vacant land, can I currently rent that land to multiple tiny home owners today?
Yes, but if you had a tiny home, you took it off a chassis, you hooked it up to city water and sewer, and you paid system development fees, you could be considered a cluster housing and go through the cluster housing process. But if you wanted to pull on in and sit your tiny home on that property, and you use gray water and not hook up to services and, you know, have a, bring in your water, that would not be allowed today.
All right, any other questions? All right, public comment, Mr. Edgar.
Thank you. Thank you, Commission. My name is Paul Edgar. I'm a resident of Oregon City. I'm on the Clackamas County Community Action Board, which has a focus for health, housing, and human services, with a lot of targeting on the homeless and the people in need. I'm also on the Veterans Advisory Council for Clackamas County, and we too have a veteran village out in Clackamas of tiny house shelters. And I would recommend that you all come out and take a look at it, because it shows you an example of what can be done. And these are temporary housing shelters, but yet at the same time, there is no limit on them. But when we look at homeless people that are brought into communities like this, the problems of the number of them that go on to get employment, get jobs, become self-sufficient, goes up exponentially. And so when we solve problems for the homeless or the houseless, we actually end up saving lives. It costs us less. The average cost by a community for every homeless person exceeds $1,000 a month in total encumbered costs that we, society, invest our money into. So sometimes it even gets a lot worse in some areas. I would like to really recommend that you open up this Pandora's box in shelters and these housing in this category too, and really get deep into it. We need something like this. We granted emergency shelter to Father's Heart when there is a heat or cooling scenario where we have to do something. It is problematic because they have a facility that doesn't really have shelters. And a good shelter community is like creating a good fishing lure. To break the grip a homeless person has on a shopping cart takes a moment to slow them up, to communicate with them. And you need something that looks good, that's inviting, that brings them in, and also kind of represents something like what Oregon City would like to do that's better than a tent or tarp. And these people are out there, we've done counts, and Newell Creek Canyon can have on average 100 people sleeping in Newell Creek Canyon every night. And there's no restrooms, no facilities. And I think we can do better than that. And that's in Oregon City. And I think it's time for us to start really putting on our hat and addressing what we can do to create temporary shelters. I built one behind my house, Actually, my wife said she wanted a shed, so we got an 8 by 12 kit, put it up, and I insulated it, walled it, roofed it, did a first-class job, and painted it and made it look like a historic building in Kanema, where I live. And it can be done. And any of you could want to take a look at it, and that cost is, could be $2,500, $3,000 to create a semi-permanent house that could sleep 2 people. And now we get into this SDCs, and we've got to come up with some solutions there, because what we're doing is we have a fee structure that prevents us from saving lives. We got to come up with something, and we got to come up with a way that we can be proactive at it. I would love to be on board with you guys in contributing every moment, because at this point in my life, this is one of those critical issues that I want to help find positive solutions to, because I think that we deserve to do better than we've been doing. We don't want to look like Portland, Oregon. Sorry, Portland, but I don't see too many positive things happening there. And I think that I would love to see the Planning Commission say, okay, you're right. Let's start thinking this through, coming up with some ideas. I would love to see a clustered housing community created that has shelters, has the centralized food service, food closets or closets, and showers and restrooms, and where people, it looks good, it's positive, and it is effectively, we have to recognize NIMBY, not in my backyard. We got to be able to figure out how to place these places, do them correctly in a controlled environment. And when we have them in a controlled environment where people check in, want to have one of these places because it's so much better living. There's food, there's shelter, a locked door where I can take my limited possessions and have it secure. And the homeless really worry about that. And so all I'm asking for you is to really open up this discussion and really start to think positively about what we can do and how we can do it, and do it positively in Oregon City in a manner that's going to be appropriate for our city and save lives. And I want to thank you for just allowing me to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Stoll, I
Yes.
have an answer to your question about temporary.
Yes.
Well, looking at the Salem and Corvallis websites, it looks like Corvallis is a little bit different, and they identified temporary as a thing over, I think it was 90 days. And then really it's a revocable permit after that. So they really, when I say non-land use, it's really this revocable permit process where there's criteria at any time they can revoke it if they feel it's not being met. Salem, it looks like they're a little bit, as a city government, a little bit more involved in a first pilot project, and it looks like they probably are trying to find ways to remove themselves, but they were there to help get it going, and they don't identify a specific time limit on that. So there's different approaches, really is the answer.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone need a break before we talk about this? Yeah, let's take 5. We'll leave, well, I'll take 7. Let's be back at 9 o'clock. doing now is the discussion, so.
Yeah.
Is anybody interested in forwarding that on, or are we interested in
Or
not
changing
forwarding that
it?
on?
Yeah.
For the affordable housing, or affordable code incentives portion.
Can I just make a general comment? I think it's really clear that that a lot more discussion needs to happen. And I think it's very clear we need to basically recommend that we do more research, have more discussion, and more work sessions about the topics we've been talking about tonight. To me, it seems very clear.
Okay, anyone else agree, disagree?
Maybe joint work sessions with the city commission on it, because I feel like on the financial incentives, that they're going to be the ultimate decision makers. So that's...
Just a quick follow-up with that. I mean, can we do just a sort of commissioner by commissioner summary of our thoughts right now? Would that be okay?
You don't have to if you don't want to.
Make it quick?
I'm happy to do that. So I just want to take each of the three sections
Okay.
one at a time.
Okay.
So you want to start? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll just put it out there. I think it's very clear that we need a lot more missing middle housing, and I know that HB 2001 is meant to fulfill that. And how we do that as a city, that's what we're talking about now and discussing. I personally think that the tiny home is a sort of Band-Aid on a bigger problem. And I think it's really important that we make some really wise decisions on how we address tiny homes and temporary homes and transitional housing. And it even could become, tiny transitional housing could actually hinder our ability to fulfill our need for more missing middle housing by taking up property and land that could be used for permanent housing. I'm not saying that I'm against transitional housing. I'm just saying it could be a problem with preventing that from happening. I think one of the other, I'm going to say an elephant in the room, is SDC fees. And how could we incentivize development by, I think that's a whole conversation in itself, is SDC fees and how we structure them. How could they be structured in a way that they're longer term and less restrictive or less impactful, I guess, in getting housing built? Could SDC fees be financed, for example, over a longer period of time? So I think the SDC fee thing is a very important part of the discussion. And the other elephant in the room, honestly, is the whole, this idea about NIMBY, not in my backyard. And I think that's a big issue, and I think a lot of people feel like we don't want that to be here, and we're worried about what it looks like and how it impacts our neighborhood. And sometimes they don't really know what the impacts are. They don't really know. It hasn't been clearly articulated on exactly what it really means. And and citizens will object to something that they don't really understand. And I think it's our responsibility as the Planning Commission and as a city to properly communicate to them what the real impacts are so that they can understand them. That's all I have.
All right, Commissioner Laws?
The biggest thing that comes up, especially when we're talking about tiny house, or, like temporary housing, is the fact that I think as a city, a planning commission, city commission, it's going to be difficult to implement unless there's structure. And to get that structure, a city can't do that alone. There needs to be stipulations at the state level for it to be really successful and for people to get on their feet. And again, like I talked about, is to have rules like, you look at these shelters downtown, the reason they're more successful is they have really strict structure and they have a check-in, and people to keep their housing have to be in at a particular time. So I think it could be successful. The other thing is, you know, if it's near a park, is the burden on our parks. And then also the fact that I'm in the historic part of the, you know, Oregon City, so there's a lot of churches with a lot of room and parking lots. I'm not against it if there's structure and there's a systematic process done and to get people on their feet and to be successful. And I don't know how this will be implemented without having that as part of the process as well.
Commissioner West?
I think it's worth pursuing affordability incentives, and land use affordability incentives, that piece. And if it isn't, if SDCs, maybe density bonuses, I don't know, but I think that's worth pursuing. The micro shelters, I am way more interested, or RVs and homes that aren't hooked up to sewer, and I'm more interested as the transitional, because I really do see that either that person sleeping on the street in front of me, or they need something before they can get to permanent housing. So I'd like to see that really worked on. And so I don't know how long do they get to be a transitional. I don't know that either, but and I like what Karla was saying, that, you know, they need to be some organization around them and services offered, some structure, safety, all of it. So that's it, where I'm at.
Commissioner Espe?
Thanks. I've sort of sprinkled some of my comments about how I feel about all this throughout the evening, so I won't go on too long. But I think that the amount of density that SB 2001 affords is enough incentive, dare I say that, without adding additional fees and other kinds of incentives along with that. I think Oregon City is an attractive community that people do want to come and develop without having to provide that much more fee incentives. That being said, I think that also we probably have a lot of housing stock that is affordable now, and so I would support a mechanism for maybe slowing down the outright demolition of those buildings, and perhaps looking at demolition fees directed toward acquisitions for open spaces as a mechanism to slow demolition down, and encouraging deconstruction with the more sustainable aspect. I also think that I do support Mr. Edgar's ideas about transitional housing. I think that there could be appropriate places for them. The sanitation probably does need to be worked out for that, and I'm not sure exactly how that would be addressed, but I think that there would be two mechanisms by which we could cite them, and that would be, creating the zoning, as GLUA had mentioned, the appropriate zoning for that type of use, as well as perhaps maybe not having them outright uses, but maybe conditional uses, so that people do have an opportunity to provide input on whether or not this type of use would go into their neighborhood. We have incubator businesses. We start out as a business person, we start out as a home occupation, we move into a small low-rent incubator business when we get a little bit more successful, and then we move on to a large brick-and-mortar process as our large brick-and-mortar building as we become more successful. And I think that in this economic environment, the same kind of model should be applied to housing, for people that are able to enable people to who aren't able to afford housing as it exists today, to be able to get into something a little bit smaller and be able to have their possessions in a place where they're safe, and having a specific address that they can have prospective employers send resumes to and that sort of thing. I think that's very important, and I think that's even more needed than it ever has been in today's housing economy. So I do support that.
And Vice Chair Schlagenhofer.
Yeah, on top of the things I've already discussed, I do like what Commissioner Staggs brought up. Tiny homes, SDC fees, definitely SDC fees are a big number it's a big hurdle when you're trying to make affordable housing. Commissioner Laws, absolutely on point with people in transitional housing need some structure, and that's going to take, something that the city can't offer. That's, we can do the zoning and the permits, but we can't run their business. So any way we can get involved in that, I agree. Commissioner Espe, Commissioner West also has concerns about transitional housing, and it needs to be a transition, not a place to just stay forever. Commissioner Espe has some very high-end things that are partially over my head, most of them. But also transitional housing, that's something we're all agreeing on. And then definitely the stepping stone is going to be, you're on the street to where can you get in? And after transitional housing, it's going to be what's the cheapest way we can get people into a house? And I still think it's the RV park. So, and then I did have one other thing besides the RV park, which I seem to like so much. Lost it now. Too many notes. I don't think it was extreme. Just affordability incentives that we want those to pass on to the right people, if we can somehow control that. And that was it.
All right, so it sounds like the consensus I'm hearing is to move everything to further discussion with the City Commission. Is that a fair statement? Okay. For myself, regarding the SDCs, I think Portland has a program where if you want to add an ADU and you make it a long-term rental for 5 years, they waive the SDCs, I think, is what someone, I could be wrong on that. As for all the others, I'm in all these places all the time at work, and some of them are really good and some of them aren't. Some of them do a really good job, and then there's other people that don't want to go into them because there's too much structure and they like the freedom of being on the streets. I'm just going to be completely honest. I'm a paramedic in Portland, and I have these conversations all the time. In my opinion, is the best way to have some with structure and some without structure, and there's one in Portland that has much less structure. And this may be self-serving, but I tend to gauge their success on how often I go there. And that sounds facetious, but really, if they're calling 911 more often than their needs aren't being met, they're using 911 to meet their needs. And so the ones that I don't go to, in my mind, are successful. Yeah, so anyway, I agree. We can move all this on to the City Commission or have a joint work session, or is that consensus joint work session? Commissioner Staggs?
So are we making specific recommendations on specific topics we want to discuss with the City Commission? Is that what we're supposed to do tonight?
So I'm taking notes, and I'm hearing that there's interest in portions of all three topics from the Planning Commission. What I could do is, I'm kind of taking these notes and I'm going to turn them into kind of an overview of the discussions to provide context, and you'll have a chance to edit and add sentences as we move forward. It sounds like we'll probably be in front of the City Commission in March. So we have some time. We have the meeting, our next meeting. We'll have our last bit of policy questions, and then I'll take all of this and put it in an overview memo, and you'll have a chance to provide edits to that and emphasize some areas and de-emphasize others. So I see, and part of the memo is the following are recommendations for future work plans, topic A, B, C, and then a couple paragraphs in A, B, C, what really resonated with the Planning Commission, if that works for you.
Yeah, and I think the more bullet points, the better, so that we can go through, line by line and discuss what portions we do and don't want to forward.
Quick question. Is the city commission now or in the recent past, are they considering all of these questions separately from us?
No, I think the reason we started through this process is we saw these topics come up with House Bill 2001, and knowing we had a looming deadline and knowing that these were a little bit of more Pandora's box and an easy code amendment, you can't redline a one-page code amendment for these, and knowing it's going to take staff time to make a work plan out of this, and we're going to have public engagement and reach out to other cities and departments, we really need to go to the city commission to see what their priorities are, both of staffing and then also what they want to work on this next year. So really, this is a chance for you to have that conversation and elevate these issues in their conversation about their work plan.
Okay. Any other comments, discussion? All right, do you have from us what you need?
I do. I'm really hearing the transitional housing as transitional, and I'll learn a little, I'll try to read up more about Corvallis, because it's really kind of sounding what we're hearing, and that it really is associated with services, and how do we as a city won't be doing that, but how do we set transitional housing up for success. I'm hearing less about affordable housing incentives, but definitely conversations related to deconstruction and demolition. But if there is incentives, just to make sure that it really is serving the people that are qualified for affordable housing. And then as it relates to tiny homes and RVs, we're hearing from Commissioner Schlagenhofer looking at RV parks, which are more organized rather than the one-off backyard comments, but that in general, there's a through line of SDC costs through all of this, and then that'll be kind of built in.
Okay, and actually, I forgot to mention to Commissioner Espe, the City Commission's House Bill 2001, they made a change that allowed detached duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes if you kept the original building. So they kind of built an incentive into the HB 2001 to retain the existing structures.
Right, and I think that's the direction that I wanted to maintain, so that people didn't do or have demolition permits that would take affordable housing out of our stock. And I think that there should be a disincentive for that. And then the incentives for demolition to provide more affordable housing should apply, definitely.
All right, well, have everything you need?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to communications.
I have one item for communications, and that is at our next meeting on the 23rd, we will have a work session, and that will be a legal training that our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter, will give, probably in conjunction with staff. And is there anything in particular, well, let me back up. So typically what the legal training will cover are different levels of land use reviews, type 1, type 2, 3, and 4. What is a quasi-judicial hearing? What is legislative? What types of communication can you partake in? And then there's some background, too, about kind of the role of the Planning Commission and allowing the public to have, their opportunity to participate. Are there any specific topics that you all would like to get information on? And you can tell me tonight, or you can send me an email and say these are some things I'm interested in. So, and that's what I have for communications.
All right, any ideas that pop into anyone's head? Go ahead.
I have a question for Ms. Herdrovich. The 2022 annual report from the Planning Commission, that's this Wednesday?
The 18th.
Wednesday? Tuesday?
It is Wednesday, January 18th.
Oh, January 18th, okay. And I was lined up for that as chair. Now we have a new chair. Does Commissioner Stoll would like to take over presenting that at the January 19th City Commission meeting?
I'll be in touch. I'd have to arrange something.
Okay.
Maybe. All right, well, I just have a few short communications. Again, thank you for your confidence in placing me as the chair, and especially want to welcome new commissioners. Commissioner Espe's professional experience in planning, and Commissioner Law's community involvement experience and citizen involvement. I think the commission struck a good balance with the two of you as a pair coming in, so welcome. And anything else from anyone else? No? All right, we're adjourned.